You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week, we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week, we're excited to welcome Ronnie Daniel, the Executive Director at the Children First Education Fund. Ronnie brings a wealth of experience from his extensive nonprofit leadership roles, including his advocacy for children with disabilities, especially those with autism. Today, we'll be discussing how to support children with autism, the impact of the Children First Education Fund, and tips for nonprofit leaders aiming to make a difference. Welcome, Ronnie Daniel.
Thanks, Jeff. It's good to be here.
Well, Ronnie, I love to give the audience a little bit of an understanding of where we're coming from in this field, because usually it's passion oriented. You don't get into nonprofits, you don't get into giving back to the community unless there's some reason behind it, some driving force. So what sparked your interest in working with children with disabilities now that that's your focus?
Sure. Well, I started early on in my life, working with nonprofits. I was really involved with the Boy Scouts when I was a kid, and worked at summer camp every summer and those kind of things, and got to know a lot of the professionals who worked in that nonprofit with the Boy Scouts. And so that really sparked my interest in the beginning to want to be involved with nonprofits. And so fast forward several years, I got my degree in nonprofit administration and started working professionally for the Boy Scouts. And then my wife and I had our first son, Ben, and we learned a few years after he was born that he was deaf. And so we began to fight that battle of having a child with a disability, working through public schools, trying to make sure all of his needs were met, and he had the resources he had and the accommodations that he needed in school. And so any parent who's dealing with an IEP with their public school and their child with disabilities, I feel your pain. It's often a difficult story and a difficult thing to work with, particularly, I'm sure, with kids with autism. And I think that's one of the passions that I've seen, especially working with all the families we do in Utah whose children have autism, is that they really just find that the needs of their kids aren't fully met in public school, and they really need some additional resources and help.
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes that empathy, that compassion, that experience to really understand the need of the community, the need of the family. But you mentioned the Boy Scouts, and you also mentioned your son, but I'd love to hear about how that experience working with the Boy Scouts shaped your approach to inclusion. I guess a gating question, did Ben get to participate in the activities of the Boy Scouts as he was growing up? Did you find ways to make sure that he had a role that he felt empowered?
Absolutely, yeah. Both Ben and my younger son, James, are Eagle Scouts, and so they were fully involved in the program. They had a chance to go to the National Jamboree when they were Scouts, and had an interpreter that went with them, and was able to be fully immersed in the programs there. And so we certainly as parents had to make sure those accommodations were received, but never in my 16 years of working for the Boy Scouts did we ever not try to accommodate a child with special needs, whatever they may have been. And so that was the thing I loved about scouting, is that they were always very accommodating. Whenever we'd go to a summer camp, or we'd go to a camporee, or we go somewhere, they were always willing to work with us and make sure his needs were being met. And so I guess that was my first approach from a professional side on nonprofit leadership, is seeing how accommodating the Scouts were, and wanting to make sure that kids' needs were met. In fact, I was involved in several different locations. I worked in 4 different states with the Boy Scouts all across the country, and in every place there were always Scout troops that were specially accommodating to kids with special needs. In fact, even here in Salt Lake, my wife works for an assisted living community company. They have multiple communities around the Western United States, but she's been involved in helping the owner of the company, who has a child with Down syndrome, start a thing called Milo's Place. That's his son's name. And so she had a local Boy Scout troop with disabilities come to one of their communities and help serve sodas to the residents of the community. And she mentioned that one of these scouts in this unit is 80 years old. And because he's a kid with Down syndrome, or an adult with Down syndrome, and but he's still a teenager at mind and loves the scouting program and been involved with it. And so my wife and I, our family's been very involved with helping families with special needs our whole lives, and it's just been great. I have a nephew with Down syndrome, and so I work with my sister and her husband and him. It's been wonderful.
Well, there's so many parallels between well-run community organizations and schools and educational organizations that are trying to be able to really individualize their care models and
Yeah.
making sure they're putting children first. But when we're talking about some of those accommodations, some of the inclusive practices, it might be nice to give a little bit of a background of just what the mission of Children First Education Fund is and what their approach is to that K through 12 population in Utah, just to kind of set the stage of understanding.
Yeah, so our mission is simply to support children with special needs in Utah and give them school choice options that they might not otherwise have. So the background about Children First Education Fund, we started in 2020. The state legislature that year passed a law called the Special Needs Opportunity Scholarship Program. And the law required that a third-party nonprofit be the administrator of that program. And so Children First was the nonprofit that was selected to administer this program for the state. And so that which tells you that there was enough support at the state legislature about this concept that they passed not unanimously, but as close as unanimously as you can get. There were a few dissenting votes, but most of the legislators voted in favor of this law. And its purpose is to give school choice to those families who aren't seeing their needs met. Here in Utah, there's about 80,000 kids with special needs. That's the number of kids who have an IEP in public school. And so there are a lot of kids. And I like to say, if you drew a bell curve of all the kids in public school with special needs, that middle chunk of the population is probably getting their needs met. They're probably getting what they need in public school. But you've got kids on the fringes, and many who have autism who really don't have their needs met in the way that they need. And so that's what this law is all about. Our scholarship program awards families for this next school year between $8,800 and $11,000, depending on where the family falls on the federal poverty level. And they can use those funds to pay tuition at a private school. We have right now 85 partner schools throughout the state that are private schools, and 17 of those are specifically focused on kids with autism. So there's a lot of options for families to use that scholarship to enroll their child in one of those schools. The other option is they can use those funds for homeschool. So if a family decides that their child's needs are going to be met, and as you know and your listeners know, kids with autism, depending on where they are on the spectrum, their needs differ widely. And so many of our families that have kids with autism choose to homeschool their kids. And so that scholarship fund then can be used to pay for any kind of educational support needs that they might have, up to that $8,000 to $11,000 level.
I think that having that option for choice is extremely important. And like you said, there is a bell curve. There's a lot of children that are going to thrive in large group school-based settings where you don't need to have so much individualized attention all the time. There's others that are going to need different supports. So when you've talked to families and navigated through this, whether it's families just with children with disability or families with children who identify autistic, what are some of the common challenges that they're facing in education, and how have they solved this by utilizing the fund and utilizing some of those resources that are available?
Some of the challenges that families have talked to me about that have autism are when they're in public school. Any state in the union, public school is struggling with the same issues. Just it's overpopulation. They have too many kids in a classroom, and so to have a kid in a classroom with autism, sometimes they'll have an aide assigned to them, and that's beneficial. Other times, it's the teacher trying to manage 29 other kids and then give special attention to that one child with autism, and it just doesn't translate for every kid. Like you said, there are some high functioning kids with autism that do well in public school, and my hat's off to those kids and the public school teachers that can help with that. But kids who are lower functioning in public school, some of the challenges are, if they have noise issues, which a lot of kids with autism have, that just doesn't work well in public school. So we've had a few families, for instance, that have been able to really enjoy some of the programs in Utah, some of the schools that focus on autism. And so those programs have small groups. They provide that more one-on-one, and certainly they might cost more than public school, but that's why the scholarship is available to help families afford that. And so those are some great resources that the kids have. Other families have chosen to homeschool. And then it's a one-on-one with mom or dad, whoever's working with the child there at home, and they can give the kids the attention and the focus that they need and help them regardless of where they're at on the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you were describing that, the first thing that's happening in my mind is I'm envisioning these circumstances where, you might have sensory challenges, you might have behavioral or communication challenges that are limiting the child's ability to even benefit from an educational environment and access the material that's going on, or where the teacher just doesn't have the specialization. And we're
Yeah,
asking a lot of those teachers to be able to understand how to work with so many different types of children and different disabilities and almost wear the hat of every profession while they're trying to teach. It becomes
absolutely.
extremely challenging. And I have empathy for that, but it makes it more important that there
Yeah,
is some
we
choice.
find that here in Utah, one of the highest referral sources that we have are education teachers in public school. These are the teachers that are trained to work with kids with special needs, but they refer oftentimes kids to our program because they know that the environment where they're in public school just isn't going to meet that child's needs. And so it's interesting that even the people who are trained to support kids in public school are referring them to our program because they know that they'll get a better educational experience with us.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, even in the clinical world, is that you want to know your scope of competency and you also want to be able to refer out. And that sounds like this situation might be occurring. Are there other barriers that exist? I mean, one of the things that immediately comes to my mind is that with a funds are sometimes limited, and you need to be able to fundraise. You need to be able to access more of the community support. Other
Yep.
things that come to mind are potentially some policy barriers, some legislative barriers. Maybe we tackle one at a time, but what are some of these barriers that you're running into?
Well, definitely one is that's related to both legislative and money is that this law that governs this program limits the number of tax credits that we can give out to parent or to donors at $5,940,000. And so that equates to about, if we were fully funded, about 590 kids that we could give scholarships out to. And so you compare the 590 to that 80,000 number I shared earlier in Utah of the total number of kids with special needs. We're serving just a fraction of the number of kids who could benefit from this program. So this last legislative session, the legislature did make some adjustments so that we can not only get money from fundraising, but we also now will be able to get some appropriated dollars, which will give us an additional a couple of million to support. So we now can grow from 500 to maybe 600 or 700 kids that we can support. That's still, though, not enough to meet the need of every kid. In fact, right now, we're supporting about 560 kids on our program, and we have 300 kids on a waiting list that if we had the funds, we could provide scholarships for.
Yeah, I mean, and that gap that you're talking about, that school-aged gap, and even all the way through young adulthood, but the focus that you all have with school-aged is oftentimes a population that's getting under-resourced right now when it comes to some of these opportunities and benefits. It's the younger kids might have additional resources, additional opportunities. The older kids, job training skills, adaptive skills, is that those might be available. We have this gap, and it sounds like you all are trying your best to be able to fill it. Is it
Right.
something that you're reaching out to community members to be able to kind of help educate as on what's missing there?
Yeah, absolutely. I spend a big chunk of my day every day reaching out to people to educate them about the scholarship program and the donation opportunity. We just had an incredible donation 2 weeks ago from one of the local banks here in Utah, $2 million. And they saw the benefit of the tax credit, obviously, but as I got to dig a little deeper into why they gave the gift, just as you did with me, I found out that the president of the bank has a child with autism. And he saw this as an opportunity not to help his child particularly, but to help a lot of kids in the community who need that support. And so the more and more we can share this message and get more people involved and engaged in our cause, whether it be from a donation perspective or because they have a family member who could benefit from the scholarship, that helps all around. That helps share the message and help us increase awareness, and that'll generate more benefit and more opportunity to serve more kids.
And I love that, and I like that it's starting at the roots. It's starting with bringing the community along, sharing the voices of community members, and helping to figure out what exactly it is that they're looking for and filling that gap. Is there a similar, and you might have researched this as you were starting to kind of grow this particular fund and this nonprofit venture, but are there other organizations in other states that you know exist that have a similar sort of support system or initiatives?
Yeah, we're actually, Utah's one of 22 states in the country who has a scholarship program like this, that they provide school choice options for kids with special needs and for the general population. In fact, Utah just passed last year the Utah Fits All, which provides school choice opportunities for all kids. Ours focus is strictly on kids with special needs. But so Utah's coming along. Like I said, we're one of 22 states in the nation. And so there is a very broad national based organization trying to help push this initiative around the country and get more and more states involved in this type of a program.
And where can people go to learn more about the resources and what's out there and what's available, and maybe even hear testimonials from families to understand what that experience felt like?
Yeah, if you go to our website at cfe-fund.org, we have quite a few stories on there, testimonies. We ask for parents to give us testimonials all the time. If you tap into our social media, at least once a week, we're posting a quote or a testimonial from a family member who's talking about the benefit that we've had with our program. In fact, we just got one that was posted yesterday that they said, because of Children First Education Fund, my kids have been able to attend private school this year. We would never have been able to financially send our kids and receive the support we have there without this kind of funding. And so that's just one quote from one mom that she shared with us just yesterday.
Wow, and that's powerful. You want to hear from the folks that are receiving the resources and who have benefited from the service to understand what sort of impact it's made. What are the future initiatives that you all have as an organization? Is that you started probably with a specific aim, and like you said, at some point you started working directly with the appropriations with the government on being able to help support there. Where is the Children's First Education Fund moving? What is the next step?
Yeah, so we're definitely involved in state legislation, as you mentioned, to try to make the law even broader or more inclusive of more families and more kids. But probably the biggest initiative we're focused on right now is trying to get private schools in every major community across the state to be involved with us. In fact, a year ago, we only had about 40 schools that were partnering with us. Today, we have 85. And so just in the last year, we've been able to reach out and get more schools engaged. Here in Utah, in order for a school to be one of our partner schools, they actually have to go through an application process to be approved by the state school board, just to make sure they're a viable entity, that they're not a fly-by-night kind of a program, that sort of thing. And so, so that's been quite an initiative that we've taken on this last year to get more schools involved. And we have schools for all the way from northern Utah and Logan, all the way down to Moab and over to St. George, all across the state. So there are many opportunities for kids to engage in private school experiences should they need it. As I mentioned earlier, we have 17 now that are schools, organizations that are specifically focused on autism and helping kids with autism here in our state.
And that's an amazing resource. Would an interesting school, an interesting donor, because you're needing to be able to build up the funds, how do they go about contacting you all to get the information to start the process? Sometimes we stop because we don't know where to start. So where do we go?
Yeah, we've tried to make our website very informative. And so no matter what the interest might be, if they're a parent looking for information about the scholarship program, if they are a school that's looking to join our program, if there are, we have over 200 service providers that can help support kids that are homeschooled. So we have a vendor classification there. And finally, if they're donors, if they're looking to make a donation and get a tax credit, 100% state income tax credit, they can go to our website and find resources for all of that information there. So that would be the first thing I would suggest, is for people to go to our website. Again, that website is cfe-fund.org, and that would be the best place to start. On our website, my name and phone number are listed there. So if you wanted to email me or give me a call, I'm happy to talk to individuals about this more specifically as well. As I mentioned, we also partner with those 85 schools and encourage them to send information out to their constituents about this program. Because most private schools, they do fundraising as well. They have a fund to help kids with financial aid if they are able to afford the full tuition. And so by schools partnering with us and receiving scholarship funds for some students, that allows them to use their financial money or financial aid money to give even more kids an opportunity. So that it's kind of a win-win for everybody when we participate together like that.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is the route to being able to receive the services or be involved with the services in Utah. And I would imagine it's got to be similar in those other 22 states.
Right.
But Ronnie, I appreciate you taking the time to educate us today and for walking us down this path, because it really does sound like the Children's First Education Fund gives a unique opportunity for somebody to be able to access the service they need in the setting they need it.
Right.
And in order to thrive. And that's the goal for any parent or any clinical provider or school-based system, is how can I empower the children the quickest, the fastest, and the best? And it sounds like you're doing that right now. So thank you so much for coming on.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.